You're listening to the Journey Podcast. The Journey is a ministry of Southcrest Baptist Church for those in college or college-aged. We hope this podcast helps you find your greatest pleasure and purpose in Jesus. Well, hey guys, welcome back to the Journey Podcast. Man, we are just so thankful and excited to do this, and we've really been enjoying it, just kind of answering some questions, talking about some topics that maybe you guys are finding interesting. I know we are finding interesting. But man, my name is Tyler. This is David. And we are excited to jump into what we're talking about today. And you may not have noticed this. It's kind of subtle. We haven't really mentioned it yet, but I'm going to mention it right now. We're doing kind of like a why series. So we've talked about, like, why is confession important? Why do we need the church? And we're going to continue that today with why do we need to share the gospel? And so, David, I kind of want to just kind of throw that to you. Why do we need to share the gospel? Why is that important for us as followers of Jesus? Is there, maybe, I know there's, a command to do it, but is there any added, element to why we need to share the gospel?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good question, I think, because the gospel, like explaining the gospel, sharing the gospel, I think is often something as Christians that we like brush over as like, yeah, the gospel, it's important. But it's so important. We need to make sure that we really have clear answers, right? And so why do we share the gospel? I think I've been like researching this, studying this a little bit, and I think that a really awesome open to this question is in 1 Corinthians. I listened to a sermon from John Piper called The Missionary Miracle. It's a really cool sermon where he went over this passage, like I said, 1 Corinthians 9, and it's just like 3 verses. So hang with me. Let me read this because it's actually really cool. So it says, "Although I am free from all and not anyone's slave, I have made myself a slave to everyone in order to win more people. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win Jews. To those under the law, like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, to win those under the law. To those who are without the law, like one without the law, though I am not without God's law, but under the law of Christ, to win those without the law. To the weak, I became weak in order to win the weak. I have become all things to all people so that I may be, so that by every possible means may save some." Man, like what John Piper talked about in the sermon was like such a cool perspective, I think, to this question of why do we need to share the gospel. In his message, he said this quote, and I was like, it's so good. He said, our gospel joy in those blessings is authentic and satisfying only if we desire to taste those blessings and that joy in the heart of other people as they experience those blessings. Okay, that's like a whole lot. That passage and that quote, you're like, I don't understand. So here's a story I think that fits with what he's trying to explain really well. I heard this story recently of these two friends, one from the United States, one from a Middle Eastern country. It's a war-torn area. It's been very difficult to visit that area. And the man in the Middle East was about to have a wedding and really wanted to have his friend in the United States come to his wedding. But it seemed just like absolutely impossible. But he begged and he did everything he could to try to get him to come to the wedding. And when he was able to come to the wedding, right, he was overjoyed. And it's so cool. Like he stayed up all night waiting for his friend to arrive. And it's like the middle of the night, the day before his wedding, and he welcomes his friend and gives him a place to stay in his house. And it's just like so overjoyed. I mean, it's so cool to think about the story of just like his joy that his friend gets to partake in this wedding with him, to the point where even like it sounds so weird, but again, he's just so excited that his friend got to be there at the wedding with him, at his wedding, that when they, weddings, they're a little different, but when they are kind of leaving the wedding party, he's like, come with us, and has him get in the car with him as they're like driving away with his bride, which says it's like, what? but again, it's just to emphasize the point. It's like, he was truly overjoyed that his friend got to partake in this wedding celebration. And so that's what Piper's saying there in that quote. Like, so let me go back over it because it's actually so cool. So like what this passage is talking about is that Paul is so driven by the reality that people would join in the wedding feast with him, right? And so he'll become whatever he needs to become, honoring God through that for sure, but like whatever he needs to become to get people to the wedding feast. And so think about this passage he's saying, this quote, he says, so our gospel joy in those blessings is authentic and satisfying only if we desire to taste those blessings and that joy in the heart of other people as they experience those blessings, right? So you kind of get that now, like he's saying that like, he's kind of saying like, hey, you should question, you should be a little suspicious of your heart, right? Of your faith, if you're not longing for others to join in the feast that you get to, like the wedding celebration that you get to celebrate in. And so that's like a weird way to answer that question. But like I said, it was such a cool thing when I was listening to the sermon, him talking about this, like, oh my gosh, like that's the core driving factor in why do we need to share the gospel? Yeah. It's because we have something like we have a beautiful inheritance that our friends and our family members, our coworkers, are gonna miss out on.
Yeah.
Right. There's a negative side, but right, it's like there's this positive side. There's hell and punishment, but there's this positive side that's like, are you kidding? Like this is gonna be wonderful. Like the friends, it's like this is gonna be wonderful. You can't miss out on this. Mm-hmm. I think that's an awesome way to kind of start answering the question.
Yeah. And you hinted at this a little bit, and we're gonna get into and answer the question of like, how do I share the gospel? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like, how do I know when it's the right time to share it with someone? But I think before we get there, mm-hmm. we're using this word gospel a lot. Mm-hmm. How would you define that? Like if someone, like we're asking someone, hey, share the gospel. And here's why it's important to share the gospel, but they may not even really understand like, what is it that I'm supposed to share?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I'm so glad like that you asked that, because again, I think that's one of those things that we like brush over. Like, yeah, share the gospel. But it's such an important thing. What you're saying, it's like, hey, hold on. What do we mean? And I love, you're the one, Tyler, that I think shared this quote with me the first time, at least that I remember hearing it from, was it J.D. Greear? The Jesus in my place, right?
Oh, yeah.
Is that
mm-hmm.
that quote? And I love that. Because that's such a quick, simple way to boil it all down, right? There's lots of details that we could get into that are beautiful and totally worth exploring.
Yeah.
But you're just like, hey, one quick sentence, Jesus in my place. And I think that's a really helpful, really, really helpful like place to start mm-hmm. when you're trying to put like specific words to defining what the gospel is. Jesus in my place.
Yeah. No, that's really, really good. Jesus in my place. Okay, so if that's what the gospel is, Jesus took my place, died for me, and now I can have this life, and not just like something that I'm waiting to experience, but I can experience that fullness right now. This is kind of the all-encompassing gospel. How do I share that with someone, and how do I know really like when it's the right time mm-hmm. to share it with someone?
Yeah. Man, I think that first of all, you need to practice sharing the gospel, and mm-hmm. You can do that like formally with friends, but I think you need to just start by having conversations about the gospel with your friends, right? And which doesn't have to be awkward, or maybe sometimes it feels awkward. It really isn't awkward.
Yeah.
But it's just to lean into moments with your Christian friends, like and bring it up, right? Like, let's talk about something that Tyler said in the Journey message from Tuesday, or mm-hmm. the venue or something, and have a conversation, have gospel conversations with your friends. Because if you're never having conversations about the gospel with your friends, man, I totally get it. It's gonna be really hard to unwrap the right words with a stranger. Of course, we're just talking about having gospel conversations with anyone, not just a stranger. But and one thing on that is like how to share the gospel. I think I think we way overcomplicate it, right? Like Jesus in my place. Once I was blind, now I see, right? He took the punishment that I deserved. But I think what we do is we make so many excuses and overcomplicate things, right? Like, I'll say, well, I'm not really great at public speaking. Like Tyler's a preacher and David's always speaking before songs and all that kind of stuff. They're public speakers. It's like, man, I get so anxious about speaking, and really, like, believe me, like, I've made the same excuses. And the reality is, everyone that I know, whether they're more introverted or extroverted, whatever, they can communicate pretty clearly about the things that they're most passionate about.
Yep.
And so you can do it, right? So I'm trying to say, you can do it, but you do need to practice. I mean, and on the question of like when, I think it's, again, we just way overcomplicate it. Like I was getting my hair cut like last week, and as a hairstylist I'd never had before, and pretty common small talk, right? She's like, where do you work? And that's a pretty big softball for me, right? But it's just like, I had that panic moment of like, oh no, like what do I say? But it's so simple, right? It's like, I work at a church, Obviously I'm trying not to be super robotic and awkward, but right, it's like, it's such a softball. Like, I work at a church. Do you go to church anywhere? It's like, just ask the question.
Yeah. And
just kind of like one more point to drive that in is like, like I said, we way overcomplicate. Is God trying to tell me to share the gospel? The answer is almost, I'll say, like, pretty much always, right? Like, yes, like right now is the time to share the gospel. Like, somebody needs the light of the gospel that you have in your heart. Everyone does.
Yeah.
And so if you find yourself asking the question in a panic moment like that, where it feels like there's this like softball or whatever moment, like definitely the answer is yes in that moment, right? Mm-hmm. If you're asking that question, should I share the gospel right now to this person in this moment that seems so perfect? It's like, yeah, yes. So
yeah. No, I think that's a great answer. And I think the other thing that I would say to that is, man, one of the biggest tools that you have at your disposal is your own story. Like when it comes to sharing the gospel, like, man, just share with someone like what Jesus has done in your life. That's like one of the biggest things that you can do when it comes to sharing the gospel is learning to just tell your personal story of how Jesus has transformed you. Mm-hmm. Because I think what can happen is we can get in this mode where we feel like we have to like get every single, like we have to say every single thing right.
Yeah.
When it comes to sharing the gospel, like I got to start here, got to get to this point, and then I've got to get to this point. Yeah. And man, like your story is so powerful when it comes to like how God has changed you and transformed your heart. And it can be something as simple as like, man, like for me, like I was such an angry person growing up, and man, Jesus has like changed that in me when I started following him. It can be something as simple as that, or it can be this dramatic testimony, like, and so I think your story is something that is so powerful and underutilized a lot when it comes to sharing the gospel. And like you said, just continue to practice it. Like, you're never gonna. I don't know that you ever feel like you're adequate or equipped to do it, but the more that you do it, the easier it becomes. Mm-hmm. And so like just look for those opportunities, pray for them. Like I think that's a big thing is praying for those opportunities. Yeah. Because I promise you, like praying for an opportunity to share the gospel, God's not gonna look at it and go, nah, I'm good. Like you don't need that in your life. No, like part of sharing the gospel is a part of like growing spiritually. And he wants that for you. And so pray for those opportunities. But man, I appreciate you sharing that. I think all of that's just really great wisdom that you shared. But yeah, man, we're kind of coming to the end of our time. Any final thoughts or anything like that?
Man, no, that's a good word. Yeah, pray. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we're coming to the end of our time, and man, we're super thankful for you guys. Share this podcast We love what we do, and we love to get to do it with you guys. So share it, like it. You can review it, and that helps us out a lot. Mm-hmm. But man, we hope you guys have a great week. We'll see you back next time. You Were Sent.